I hereby call the session, this regularly scheduled meeting of the Sunderland Selectoard and Sunderland Finance Committees. The time is 6:33 p.m. Alright, we are not going to be approving the minutes. We will be approving those at our next meeting on 1/21. We're going to jump right into new business today. So starting off with our police chief, Eric, we're going to be doing some budget requests and going over our FY 25 budget stuff. So whenever you're ready, Eric, you can do it.
I just bought color graph to show you some calls by times. Don't worry about the side column, it's just the bottom. It shows you the day of the time of the day. I mean, just to give you a comparison, the system that we have with the dispatch got updated in 2018. So this just showed you, don't worry about the numbers on the side. I couldn't get that to change. But the time shows you that the red graph is 2024, so last year's calls, and the green graph shows you when the system was revamped in 2018. So you can see from 7 AM to 6 PM, they're quite, it's the bulk of our calls. But for the most part, it then tapers off around 1, 2 AM. But that is reflective of all types of calls, from calls for service for police, medical calls, fire calls, complaints about speeding or investigations, things of that nature. So I guess I'll start off with capital expenses. I only put in one request this year, and that was to upgrade the video system that we have at the public safety complex. We purchased that 8 years ago. That system monitors all the cameras on the exterior and interior of the building, which includes the jail cells, the booking room, the interview room, things of that nature. When we came to the town years ago to get that upgrade, we were able to use most of the existing cameras, so we saved money with that. A lot of those were analog. Some of the cameras have since gone, and we've been able to replace them through other capital expenses with IP-based cameras. So that camera system allows us to record any booking for prisoners to like I said, the exterior of the building. We have an interview room for victims or suspects, not at the same time. And that's how we would be able to record those and then turn them over to the DA's office. So the last time they were in, a company that handles the cameras, they reminded us that the system was at the end of life. So with the end of life of the camera system, that's why I'm bringing it forward with the request. The number I put down here is a best guess. It's an estimate that he gave me when he was last here. I'm still waiting to get the quote from the company to determine how to replace that existing system. But that's all we have. I'm not coming to you asking you for another cruiser. We did that last year. So this year is just the video system. Thankfully, last year we were also able to update a lot of the maintenance of the building. Some of the stuff that went kind of bad. We had the Sally port was plugged and wasn't draining. Some of the other exterior door problems and cameras that we had to replace. We're still in the middle of fixing that because that was approved last town meeting. So we have until July to fix those. This is completely separate. This is for after July, and this would be for the DVR, the video recorder itself, the server. We're able to access that, be able to pull the video, get it to the DA's office for the victims and witness advocates, or for the DA's office for when we're processing prisoners. And on the same time, we're able to utilize that for any other claims that happen in or around the building. So any accidents, any slip and falls, things of that nature. So that's in the capital expense that the police department is requesting this year.
Now you're saying that 14.5 is the estimate.
Yes.
How many cameras is that including? Do you have a?
So we have, it's a hodgepodge of cameras. So we have, and I'm gonna screw up the name of it. I wanna call it a multiplexer, but it's not a multiplexer. There's a box up in the ceiling. There's 3 boxes in the ceiling that have 4 camera ports going in. The ability to have four camera ports. And those are analog cameras that then go through that into the system we're looking to replace, because that is only allowed to have 8 ports. So out of those 8 ports, 5 are IP based and 3 go to that other box that's up in the ceiling. that then disperse it out to analog cameras. So right now, I think we have 12 cameras.
Mhm.
We're not looking to add any more. This current year we're in now, at town meeting last year, we got our capital expenses or opera, I can't remember which one. But that paid for the upgrade of the rear camera because all those cameras were installed when the building was put in 20 years ago. So we got life out of a lot of these cameras.
Mhm.
Out of all the exterior cameras that we have, I'd say with the replacement of this one, we only have 2 more old ones. All the other ones have been replaced every year, as they were failing. The booking room camera had to be replaced, the interview room camera had to be replaced. The Sally board was part of the capital expense last year or this fiscal year. So we have, I think, 12 or 13 cameras, right now, and I think that's a pretty good fit with what we have. We get almost 360 around the building and inside, like I said, it's, jail cells, interview room, booking room, and the equipment room and the Sally board. We don't have any on the inside of the fire side. They were asked before if they wanted cameras in the Sally board, but they didn't want them, so we didn't bother putting any in there. So the goal would be eventually to replace them with all IP based.
Mhm.
So the reason why that is potentially high is because you can either get an 8, 16, or 32 camera ports. And we're looking at getting a 16 because eventually when we replace the other ones that are analog, you have to have a port to plug them into.
Right, and so,
And that's why.
and that gives us a little bit of expandability
Yeah,
with that one.
Yeah, not much, but just enough to get us by for the next, hopefully 10, 20 years.
Gotcha, and you put down 10 years for the expected use.
Yep.
That's okay.
Well, the cameras should last for 10, 20 years. The DVR could last us 10 years, 8 years. But when they came in this past year, they were saying it's the end of life. So if that fails.
Yeah.
We have no cameras.
Any questions from the board? No. Okay. Anything from the finance committee?
Sounds pretty important, the day and age we're living in that. Cameras recording.
So what was the, I didn't, the capital request is you don't know the number yet, but you think it's about,
Based on what he told me, costing were between 12 and 15,000, so they, on the capital request, I put 14.5. Once I get the quote, I'll be able to produce that to both boards, and we're hoping it's gonna be less, but I'm not sure yet. That request was made a month and a half ago, so I'm gonna have to follow back up and find out why we haven't got it.
So, just a question on this.
And that was just to lead into eventually the budget, but that,
Oh, okay. I was gonna say, cause it just looks like your 6 AM time slot is increasing with call volume.
well, yeah, so I chose, as I said, to do the 2018, because that's when the system was revamped.
Yeah.
And then last year, so yeah, the 6 AM, a lot more traffic, a lot more calls for service, people either getting up earlier. Or the midnight shift gets off at 7, so they're busier. But the other days you can see other times from 7 AM to 6 PM is a pretty robust amount of calls that we get compared to the other 2 shifts, but.
Yeah.
But yeah, 6 AM has increased a lot in the past 6 years.
Yeah, I just wasn't sure if you were looking to do something about, coverage on that, or
Not yet.
it's something that's still doable with your current, okay.
Yeah. No other questions for capital?
No, I think we're good on that one.
Okay. Alright, so I submitted a budget for the police department, and I gave an explanation sheet regarding what we're looking at doing. We already covered the capital part of that. In regard to the police budget, I had 2 tabs, one was listed as no addition, and the other one was listed as the full-time addition. So a couple of years ago, the town was gracious enough to add to our full-time staff. An addition that we had not seen in 20 years or almost 20 years. So the reason we get into the addition, whether it's something the town wants to do or not, is as I explained in the explanation, is shortly after post came into effect, the MPTC, or the Municipal Police Training Committee, put out a notice about having all police officers trained equally, which is great on its face. But if you look at any departments west of 495, they rely heavily on part-time use. So part-time officers go through a part-time academy, it's usually a couple nights a week, a matter of 6 or 7 months, depending on which academy you go to. Well, that academy is no longer, they don't have a part-time academy. So, you know, if you look at some of the part-timers across the Commonwealth, when they got sponsored and came on, some of them were hairdressers, plumbers, stay-at-home moms or dads, or worked in finance or whatever, but they had a drive where they wanted to become a police officer, but they didn't want to give up their full-time job, so they do it on a part-time basis. Well, with the part-time academy going away, and there was literally no more part-time academy. Sorry, there was one in Worcester, and that's about a year long, and you go to that academy, and once you complete that academy, you become certified in the state to be a police officer. The good and bad to that is, once you graduate from them, some small towns like us and some big cities will see that and say, oh, I get a fully certified officer for no cost, thank you, and then they take them. We've already lost one officer to Greenfield, one of our part-timers went to Greenfield. We have another one of our part-timers went to Wilbraham, another one went to Berningston, so we're slowly losing part-timers. So now we're down to 5 part-timers. When I wrote this, back in December, I think I said we had 6 and we're gonna be going down. Well, we just received a resignation of one of them, so now we're down to 5. So there's really no more part-time academy to pull from or send people to. I've been chief here 8 years. In my other town, I was chief there for 10 years, and we were able to send people to a part-time academy because once they came back, you could then train them and have them be an officer for your department. And there really wasn't a lot of stealing of other part-timers, but now with no more part-time academy being around, you don't have that luxury. So that's why I put together a budget to show, the budget consisting of what we have through the contracts, going forward. And another budget showing adding a full-timer into the rank. Like I said, the town was gracious enough to do that a couple years ago, and we were able to put that through. But we have to make a determination in the very near future about what we want to see policing in this. Do we want it to be full-time, or do we want to try to make it work and have shortfalls, have openings, and have holes in the schedule? Because without part-timers, you're either running the shifts empty or you're paying overtime. And as you know, overtime is quite more than what a part-time officer is. I myself started part-time in the 90s, and after a year and a half, got promoted to full-time, and I've been full-time ever since. I went to a full-time academy after that, and a lot of these part-timers are doing that, but since post and going through the Bridge Academy and being certified, a lot of these departments are picking up officers that have successfully completed that training and then putting them on full-time. And once you get to the 2,400 hour rule that they've set in the state, you can now be certified through the state as a full-time employee or a full-time officer, therefore negating the need to go to a full-time academy, because you're basing it off of your years of experience and the training that you received. So we don't have that luxury anymore to go back or send people to a part-time academy. So we have to look at hoping that we can hire another part-timer. We've been looking since June, we haven't been able to fill it. And the only other possibility would be either hiring another full-timer and then putting somebody added onto the ranks. Excuse me. Or, like I said, continuing with the budget that we have and trying to make do with the existing staff that we have. So in that tab, you'll see that I put down the costs associated with both, one with a new full-time and one without. And the difference between the two is only 2.4% between having a full-time, an additional full-time added on, as opposed to the existing budget we have now. And the way we're able to do that is to borrow from Peter to give the Paul. You know, we're taking from part-time pay, so that way we're not feeling the burden or the hit of the full-time salary for that officer. So if we take away from the part-time budget, because we're not anticipating the So right now, the part-timers have scheduled 2 shifts per week, so that's 9-hour shifts, that's 18 shifts a week. 18 times 52 gives you the amount of hours. That times the dollar amount gives us what they have for regularly scheduled time. On top of that, we also have budgeted on holidays for part-timers to work. A full-timer can work, and a full-timer works, that's time and a half, it's holiday pay pursuant to their contract that the town approved. So the addition of a full-time would reduce some of the part-time pay. I took out 54.18% from the part-time wages, which was about 32,200 and change, to soften the hit of having a full-time officer added on to the ranks. And that's what I detailed in both of them. You can see that on it, with the full-time officer, the budget would be 685 and change, and without it, it would be 670 and change. So it's a $15,289 difference between trying to hire a full-timer or adding a full-timer to the ranks, or trying to stay with the existing staffing that we have. And like I said before, we've already reached a point where we're losing part-timers. We don't have any ability to put any more part-timers on. We're always looking, but if we can't get there, we're running the risk of continuously running shifts open, or in relying heavily on state police to cover, or overtime. If you look at last year's budget, the overtime was astronomical, but that's because our part-time pay, or the budget, part-time budget, wasn't used fully. So we didn't go over budget for payroll. It was just, we spend more in overtime, we spent less than part-time. So far, so good.
Just quick, are you confident that you hire full time, you're gonna stay? Or they come here and then you're gonna stepping stone and go someplace else? I mean, how competitive is our full-time pay versus
That's always a worry. I had that worry in the 10 years I was chief in my last town, and in the last 8.5 years here. You always worry about that. Our full-time officers' pay is good. It's not as competitive as some of the bigger cities. There are some cities that are offering sign-on bonuses. We can't do that. We don't have it in our budget. The union just successfully negotiated a contract with the town, so they asked and the town asked, and they met in the middle, and they found something that was agreeable. There are some towns, the farther you get out west, that are hurting far worse than we are, and they're paying a lot more money for a full-timer, hoping that that will keep them here. Another way of doing it is if we end up having to say, send someone to a full-time academy, we would obviously interview potential candidates, and once we selected somebody, we would sit down with them and try to either draft up a contract or something that says that if we're gonna send you to the academy, you're gonna give us time. And if you give us, say, 3 years, if you don't give us those 3 years, then potentially we could have them agree to pay back the town for the services that we provided them. So pay to go to the academy, the tuition to go to the academy, all of those things. And that would be prorated as the years they're here. So if they're here for a year, they owe us 2 years, that type of thing. So there's always different things that we could try to look at.
When you've sent officers to the academy before, do you hire them first and then pay them throughout their academy stint?
So it depends on the town. So when I came here, the town had already agreed to send an existing part-timer to the full-time academy. So when I came here, I had to see how they did that, speak with the select board, explain this is the process we're gonna go forward with it. So he was already hired, so he was being paid to go to the academy, or a daily wage to go to the academy. If you sponsor someone to the academy, there's different types of sponsorship. There's you send them to the academy, so patch, uniform, gun, badge, you go to the academy and you get paid every day to go. The other form of sponsorship is what they call self-sponsor. So you decide you want to be a police officer, we sponsor you to go, but you go on your own volition, you pay for everything. We just give you our name and our patch, with no guarantee that you're an employee of ours until after you graduate. Honestly, what's more appealing to candidates is if you pay them to go.
Of course.
of course, but. This budget reflects a yearly salary for that seventh officer, that would be from July 1. If we don't hire anybody until October, then there's months of pay that's just sitting there. If we send them to the academy, then the question now comes up is when is the next academy? So if they have no police experience, we can't do an OJT, we can't on the job train them because they have to be a graduate of an academy. If they're a part-time officer from, say, Shrewsbury, that's where you came from. You say they're a part-time officer from
We
Shrewsbury.
don't have any left.
No, I know. Kristen would kill me. So say we hired a part-time officer from Shrewsbury, we could potentially hire them as a part-time officer and still send them to the academy until they graduate. And then they would have police powers and then come here and learn the town and train here. But it's a decision that we have to make with either the budget or with the candidate to go forward. Are we gonna self-sponsor? We're gonna try to hire someone who's already full-time, send someone as a self-sponsor, or are we gonna send them to the academy? So those are the three options. Someone who already has an academy graduate certificate, someone who is a self-sponsor, or we're gonna send them to the academy. So those are the three options that we have.
There are 6 part-timers, five, sorry, not 5, interested in being full-time, to go to the academy. Could be.
Maybe one, maybe two. But I don't know, because I don't wanna sit down with them and say, hey, we're gonna be doing this in, because I don't wanna give them any false hope, plus. You know, I don't want them to think that I'm trying to fit them into the position, this is the position. You know, all we can do is if this is approved after July 1, we can post it in-house prior to posting it out. And allow that candidate an extra week or two to put in, that's about it.
Do you think that if the shift happens, the next officer and reducing the need in the part-time officer pool? Do you think that the part-time officer pool and need is then stable, or are you still concerned about not having enough with the remaining hours after that?
So when I started here years ago, shortly after I started, my goal was to try to have 2 part-timers for every full-timer. So at one point, we had 10 part-timers and 5 full-timers counting me. And my goal for that was, so we had 2 part-timers for every full-time. And if we had open shifts, if we had, benefit time, we taking personal vacation, sick time, then we have enough people to choose from. Getting down to 3, 4, or 5 part-time officers. It's tough because a lot of, like I said, they all have full-time jobs. One works well, they all work in the private sector full-time. But, well, I'm sorry, all but one work in the private sector, one is a full-time officer in another town. That may eventually be the very next person that ends up resigning because their time in that full-time capacity is too much and they can't devote any time here. So with that happening, we'll be losing another officer. The other officers that we have are in the civilian world and let's face it, making pretty good money. So they only want to be a part-time officer and they'll do what they can to fill in. If we have an officer go away for an injury or an illness, it decimates us. Because there's no way with the existing staff that we cover 40 hours a week. We can barely cover 16, 17, 19 hours a week. So we're already stretched now, and by doing a full-time addition, we would alter the schedule in a way to give us as much coverage as we can, especially during the peak times. Because you want to be able to have enough officers to handle the call volume during those peak times. So we want to make sure that that is covered and we can still provide that service to the town, because when you go home at night, you want to be able to go to bed and sleep and not worry about what's happening out there. And the officers being out there, whether they're part of the community, they reside in the community, they're local, they're all within a short distance or in town. But the idea would be having full-time certified officers is an easier concept to manage than part-time officers who only here once a month, twice a month, 3 times. And I'm not discounting part-timers in any way, because like I said, I started there. So I understand what, granted, I was a much younger man back then, But I understand the drive and the ambition that they have, that they want to provide that service to us or to any town they work for. But we just want to make sure that we're have that equal balance. I constantly joke about if I could read tea leaves or I could foretell the future, I'd be doing this from the beach in the Dominican and just calling up saying, hey, you're gonna have a bank robbery, or hey, you're gonna have this happen. But it's really never any, you try to go off of what's happened in the past and based on the numbers and try to provide coverage. At the very least, for the times in which you have the bulk of the calls. So,
Now, how, in terms of scheduling, are you going, does the additional full-time officer work into your current shift schedule, or are you gonna be redoing the shift schedule to have more overlap, have more shifts during the day, something like that? Have you thought about how you're gonna do that?
so the full-timers went to a 4-day, 10-hour schedule a couple years back.
Yep.
4 years ago, I think. So with that, given the schedule we currently have, we could potentially just plug them in somewhere, but it makes better sense to reformat the schedule and offer it to the full-timers during the shift bids, so that way it takes effect come July 1. Whether we have the full-time, we would do it if the town approved it, but we wouldn't have the body to put into it. So we would have to make some concessions with the union saying, okay, hey, listen, we've got the money, we're gonna be putting somebody on. This is the schedule we're going to go to. But until then, we may have to stay with the schedule we have now until that gets changed. Or we change to the schedule we wanna go to and know that in 3 to 5 months, that person's gonna be plugged in to that hole and then go from there.
Okay.
So looking at, and I think we've put together like 6 schedules already, trying to figure out what pieces well. And again, day shift and evening shift, we're trying to do a lot of 2-person coverage across the board, with the exception of maybe Sundays. But the bulk of the calls that are happening are during the week or early evenings. So that's why we're trying to figure out what's gonna work well for both the employee and for the town.
I'm wondering if, looks like the overtime for this year is running around closer to what was budgeted, and obviously things could go wrong. Are you thinking that if you had a full-time officer, that you would have less pressure on that overtime budget line and be able to maybe spend under,
Well,
is overtime happening because of schedules as well as
So overtime,
X special?
yeah,
events?
overtime, there's a few things that tie into that number. So we hold, if you will, a certain amount of hours a month, like say 4 hours a month for overtime, just for court. Because sometimes when an officer has to go to court, it's not the officer that works the day shift. And if it is the officer that works the day shift, they're not getting overtime, they're just going. So it's for the officers that work the evening and the overnight. So, or if it's their day off, if they have court. That doesn't happen that frequently. A lot of the things we're able to do with the on-duty staff during, so if it's a magistrate hearing, it's a ticket appeal, we're able to do those with the existing staff we have on the day shift. When it gets into officer getting paid for overtime, it's if it's outside of their 40 hours, or if, say, an officer gets summons to go to, not an arraignment. An officer gets summons to go to a trial. So in December, I got summons to go to a trial for a drunk driver that I had arrested at 7 AM on a February morning last year. I don't get overtime, one, because I'm salary, but I was on during the day, so I just happened to go there. So the overtime, if it's not for that, the other part of the overtime is when you have open shifts, you offer it to full-timers if the part-timers weren't able to take it. So you offer it to part-time first, if part-timers can't take it, then you offer it for overtime. And the other thing is, if, like we had the other day, an officer was dealing with a disturbance, at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Eventually had to arrest the suspect, and that officer didn't get out of here until 2 or 3 hours after their shift. So that was also the overtime. So that's why you blanket or you cover that anticipated. You hope it's not gonna happen, but the anticipation of what potentially could happen.
So the open shift thing could there could be less pressure on open shifts if there was 5 full-time, 8, 7 full-time officers instead of 6. I'm getting all my, another full-time officer.
Another,
No, and for me, the big plus to having an additional full-time officer is the X factor, is that you know that the person's showing up because that's their full-time job, and barring illness and all other things. But part-time officer, their day job, they get busy, they're offered extra hours at that day job, and as you said, a lot of these people are making more money at the day job than they are doing this, and so the incentive isn't to put you there, and you don't have the guarantee that you're gonna have the officer there. So if you look at our, our overtime wages are way up. Then you go down to part-time wages and we only are using 72% of those because, and that's the play there. But we end up paying out a lot more for 8 hours of overtime for an officer to be on for that shift than we do for a part-time officer, both because the part-time officer's wages are lower and also aren't at overtime rates. So for me, it's sort of a consistency and control thing more than anything else is having those officers that you know are gonna be showing up for those shifts, and also it's part of the shift bidding system, and so. It's included as a main thought rather than an afterthought in a lot of ways.
and last year's budget. We were hit with, like I said, one of the full-time officers left, so we were down that full-time officer. That officer went to Shelburne, and then we were able to eventually hire somebody, but that wasn't until the first week of February. So we had 3 months or so, where we had that one spot open. So that's why a lot of the overtime happened instead of the part-timers, because the part-timers were running around working not only their 2 shifts or the 2 scheduled shifts we had per week, but the extra shifts because we had that open. And when that couldn't happen, we had to make some choices about, okay, how are we gonna fill this? Can we have somebody hold over for 4 hours instead of covering the full 10-hour shift? So at least during the peak of the hours, we had more coverage, and that's why a lot of that happened. That's why you see that the part-time budget was barely used, because at that point, they were already maxed out. The last 2 years have been difficult, because with all the extra training that they're mandated to get to, all the extra certifications, and then go forward with unknowns about scheduling, and then that person leaving, it really took us out of the knees, so.
Well, and really, the numbers are what speak to me here, and so it makes sense, if we know that we can budget $1 million for part-time, but we don't have the part-time bodies, that's not gonna get used.
No.
And instead, we shift that into the overtime line item, which grows, out of control. I'd rather have a more realistic budget that says, no, we don't have that many part-time hours available to us from the employee pool out there, and budget accordingly so that we aren't spending all this overtime instead of we're spending full-time and budgeted hours.
Yeah, and there's a lot of towns, bigger than us, that have, policies where they force full-timers to stay over, to come in. So there's absolutely no holes, there's no gaps. So, and the issue with that is you're running officers 12, 14, 16, 18 hours a day to cover these gaps, and their overtime budget is astronomical. We've been able to, even though last year we went well over the overtime budget, we only did that because we didn't use the part-time budget, or we only barely used the part-time budget. So with that, we have to also see that, okay, the overtime budget could be far worse, but we also, the community we have, sometimes we go with some of the shifts that are not covered. So, for instance, we have a holiday where only one of the shifts got filled instead of all 3 of them. So the other 2 shifts were held over or covered by the state police. The idea would be to have 24/7 coverage all the time, but we just haven't been able to do that because of the staffing.
Yep.
And then part of that budget, you'll see that, I didn't increase the clerk wages because that's through the personnel committee and so we didn't touch that. The fuel expense, all we did was add $500 to it. That only went from 14,500 to 15,000. And the police department expenses themselves went up 3.5%. And that's just with the increase in dues and costs to run an agency. That's why that went up. But other than that, the other increases, if you look at, say, the one with no full-time addition, you'll see that the full-time officers, like I said, just negotiated a contract. So these increases are reflective of that contract.
Any other questions from the select board? Anything else from the finance committee? Cool. Thank you very much, chief. We really appreciate all the hard work on this.
No,
And the
thank you.
contracts.
Thank you very much.
Next up, we have our library friends here. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely, and I just want to start off by saying, we really appreciate that you were able to get everything together on short notice, and so the gap that we had, really means a lot to us to have you helping us out and doing like that, so thank you.
No problem, yeah, happy to be here. We submitted 2 budget requests as was suggested. The first one, reflects level services for us. The level services request, includes, no increase for the library building expenses, but it does include a, $2,521.61 increase, in the library general expenses. And so library general expenses for us is essentially our membership in our library consortium, CW Mars. And it is also our, library materials. And so the town budget pays for, approximately 3/4 of what, of the books, other materials that we offer to our patrons. The remaining 1/4 is paid for by the Friends of Sunderland Public Library, private donations or other grants. And so we are required by the state of Massachusetts in order to be a library, to spend a certain amount of money each year on our materials. It's called the Materials Expenditure Requirement, or MER. And so this increase is just to keep up with the MER, so that will keep us at about the same level. Whereas, where the town is paying for our CW Mars membership and 3/4 of the materials that we are required to provide, and then the other quarter is gonna come from the Friends of Sunderland Public Library and their fundraising efforts. And so the reason, and it's also worth noting, that this increase, it's gonna purchase the same amount of books, or probably even less, just because of incredible price increases in terms of, both digital but also print materials that we are seeing this year. There's a lot happening in the publishing world, and it's also making it extremely difficult for us to get books in a timely fashion. We've had to recently switch to a new book distributor because our other book distributor was about 4 months behind in getting us new releases and things like that, where they used to get it to us a couple of weeks ahead of time so we could catalog them and have them ready. And so after meeting with the vice president of libraries for that, you know, they were just saying that it's, if they're not getting books from the publishers in time, because publishers are only printing what has already been purchased, and they're not factoring in libraries and other things. So it's, something that a lot of libraries are dealing with, but it is worth noting that the small increase will make a big difference in allowing us to just keep level services. It's not, we're not asking to purchase more items. It's going to keep us where we are. And then I did not put any requests in for the support staff or library director wages, because that is going to be determined by the personnel committee. And then for the increased services budget, I am proposing that the increased service I would like to offer is to open the library on Thursdays. We've always been closed on Thursdays, and it's a big request through patron surveys and also just in general, that we be open on Thursdays in particular, and also that we be open more morning hours. Currently, the library is only open on Monday, Friday, and Saturdays in the mornings. Everything else is afternoon hours or evening hours. And we're finding with you know, the pandemic, a lot of people working from home now. There's just a lot more people with flexibility in their schedules, and they're much more inclined to come out in the morning to the library, and that just seems to be what is convenient for folks. Also, we've seen a huge influx of senior citizens using the library recently, with the moving or the construction of Sanderson Place. And then also just in general, it's really nice to see. But they tend to come in the mornings, and then especially this time of year when it's so dark out, it's difficult for them to come out at night. And so opening on Thursdays, it would be 10 a.m. until 5 p.m. It would not increase the cost of our building expenses. It would not increase the cost of our materials budget, the general expenses. But where you are seeing the increase is for additional staffing. So the increase I'm requesting is 7 staff hours, so that we can have 2 employees present in the building. We currently have myself and 1 other staff member who have enough flexibility in our schedule to make up the other 7 hours. So I'm just asking for 7 hours, even though it's a total of 14 staff hours to add that to our schedule. And so another reason why I want to open on Thursdays is because I'd really like to set those extra hours up as sensory friendly hours. It's very important to me to support people on the autism spectrum with other neurodivergences or sensory processing issues, and to make them feel like a welcome part of our community. Sensory friendly hours doesn't mean we're only open for people on the autism spectrum. Everyone is welcome. It's just a more comfortable and welcoming environment for people on the autism spectrum, but also for others too. Some people just like a quieter library experience. We get that a lot, that we are a noisy library, which is a good thing in a lot of ways, but having a day where we don't have any special meetings, where we keep the lights a little bit lower, there's no excessive sounds, and we reserve the community room as a quiet space to retreat, while the rest of the library and the children's room together can be a little more active, I think would be a really nice thing for the whole community. I feel like everyone would really enjoy that.
Cool. I remember you mentioning last year when you asked for the same thing, that being able to add a day on Thursdays means you don't have to try to reschedule existing events that might be louder and noisier. In order to accommodate that, it has a day that's sort of a blank slate to begin with.
Exactly, yeah, that's the reason why I want a totally new day. We've never been open on Thursdays. We're open on Tuesdays, we could open Tuesday mornings, for example, but that, I don't think that would be a good idea for sensory friendly hours, because it would be more limiting, or it would make, pre-existing meetings and stuff like that would have to cancel. And it also just, people aren't used to it. Excuse me. So my concern would be that folks wouldn't quite understand the difference between the sensory friendly hours, and it may not be as sensory friendly as we are hoping. I think if we're starting fresh with a clean slate, this is a new day that we are open for these specific hours with this specific atmosphere that we're trying to create. I think would be very beneficial.
In terms of similar towns to ours, is not being open all weekdays a normal thing for towns our size?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So, the town of Sunderland, we are, before our size, we're only required to be open, I think it's 25 hours a week. We're open 40 hours a week. It's quite a lot, honestly, for a town our size. But those hours are used. And we get requests for more. January 2nd, on Thursday, we had someone ring the doorbell repeatedly, banging on the door. Why aren't you open? I need to get my book, like very upset. Greenfield's open all the time. Why aren't you guys ever open? We're open 40 hours. Greenfield's open 62. They also have 12 full-time staff members and we have 1. So it's a little bit different, the situation, but yeah, and people just really use our hours. This past year, 2024, we circulated 71,000 items. That is just below, like by 500 items, our all-time record from 2019. So it's, we're bounced back and continuing to expand even after the pandemic. It's really nice to see people use our library, people appreciate our library. And I think that if we're expanding our services, we should do it in a way that is gonna make it beneficial for what people want.
Now, the 7 hours per week, is that for adding on to that one existing full-time employee, or is that gonna be split between a full-time employee and some part-time employee or something like that?
So with the 7 additional hours, I'm going to add to a part-time employee schedule. So I budgeted for it, based on our substitute circulation assistant rate. And so that's the lowest pay that we have. And so I feel that, rather than, if we were to add to any of our regular staff members' hours, it would bump folks up to where they need more benefits. And it's a large expense for the town. We do have substitutes who I'm sure would love the additional hours, and I think having more flexibility too, with having more part-time employees would make it easier for coverage when we have illnesses and other special things.
That makes sense, great.
So, I think you said there's really two full-time, right? There's you and one other?
No,
No,
just
just,
me.
you're the only full-time?
Yes.
Really? Okay.
Yes. I have 2 staff members who are part-time
You know,
benefits.
Aaron, I just assumed Aaron's always there.
Yeah, no, he is.
But yeah, you run an amazing library. I know people, not just from our town, but all the towns surrounding, especially here right now, take advantage of everything you do. And I would assume those 7 hours are also out for opportunity to plan some of the events that you do. It's sometimes, you run out of time trying to plan in your normal budget of hours. My question would be though, sorry, that's my question. Are there grants out there? If you focus those 7 hours on sensory or autism, maybe have you looked at some grant possibilities that could be out there to help offset the additional costs? I'm just guessing.
Yeah, no, I actually put in an application, in December to the American Library Association. They have a grant for small libraries called Libraries Transforming Communities, and you're supposed to select a disability or disabled population. And so I applied for $20,000 to open our library for sensory friendly hours. And then also to construct a sensory friendly space in the children's room. If we get the full 20,000, there's also a $10,000 tier as well, and to make other sensory improvements to our building. Of course, that's a grant. It's not necessarily a given that we would receive it. And also the grant term is not on the fiscal year exactly. So we're the select board to approve the extra 7 hours. Some of the grant funds could be used for, could offset that. But if I'm gonna be adding hours, if I want it to be a permanent change, I don't wanna have it for 1 year and then have to take it away. So if we do receive the grant, and the sensory friendly hours are not supported by the town, I would have to reevaluate if that's where we wanna go and talk about the future of it, if it's possible for the next year. So, certainly there is the chance, if we receive that grant, that I would not need to spend as much of the town's money on adding the sensory friendly hours, but again, none of that
I
is
think
here.
there's Catherine's saying, like, we don't really want to depend on grants for recurring expenses.
Correct, I'm just asking, have you looked at that?
And that to really, I think if we get the grant, then the kind of support that we can offer for sensory, would be superior than if we have to just, kind of make do with even having the building open, but not having extra funds to build the space or get materials or to programming that supports the sensory program.
If you have the grant, then you can support it with the staff, with the staff.
Yeah.
Thank you.
School, do you have any questions?
No, I'm good.
Shannon?
How many part-time staff do you have? I mean, you get-
4 regular, and then we have 3 substitutes right now.
Only 2 are benefited.
Yeah, sorry, it's a full-time equivalency of like 3.5 now, that's what we're up to.
Thanks.
used to be.
How do you think about, you mentioned, or someone at one point mentioned the Deerfield Library project, how do you think about the impacts that that's having now while they're under construction? People may be looking for resources here, and then when they're done, and then where there may be some new overlaps or gaps between their programming and ours, how do you think about that?
Absolutely, so I don't see other libraries necessarily as competition, even though we do use the same, patron pool. You know, if you're kind of looking at us, we used to be the shiny new library on the block. We're more than 20 years old now. And Deerfield is under construction, Amherst is under construction. Montague, just received word that they were, approved for a construction grant as well, so that's gonna happen. Hadley was done a couple of years ago, brand new building, so we are now the old library, except for Port Whately, they have a much older building than us. But everyone surrounding us, Greenfield too, they all have these new libraries, and a lot of our capital request, or one of our capital requests is really to help us provide what our patrons want, what we're seeing in newer libraries, to make it so that we're providing services that Sunderland patrons need, so they don't feel the need to go to these other newer libraries. But really, we have so many like library hoppers is what we call them, families who they go to one library one day, another library another day, they're, you know, all over the place. We work really well together, and I think there's enough patrons and enough need for all of us to provide important services.
We're funding under Sunderland, you know, it's fabulous. So,
We don't like it. And you know, we circulated 71,000 items. That's really, really good for our area. It's more than Hadley circulates. They're a much larger town with a brand new library. It's, you know, and that's just one data factor.
Unrelated question, how do you think about how the MER number gets set every year? Obviously, 6% higher, that led to the budget request this year, like, does that jump around? Is it pretty consistent?
It is consistent, so it is,
And I know you're not the one who sets that.
no, it's the state of Massachusetts, the Massachusetts Board of Library Commissioners, so it is, it's based on the size of our town, and so it's 19.5% of the library's operating budget, must be used towards materials, so that's what creates the
I
MER.
see.
And so when our budget increases with normal increases in inflation, that increases the MER slightly every year as well. So it's just you know, keeping up with inflation. It's a way for the state to make sure that towns continue to support their library and they're not falling behind.
the state does two things. It wants to be sure that, your spendings, that you're not taking a budget and like just putting it into the buildings. And that every year there's a consistent investment in material. And then there's another standard, the MAR, which means that ensures that the town, that the library is being funded proportionally to the rest of the town. Because they're not also frowned upon, for example, if the town was facing a bad budget year and their solution was, let's just cut the library budget, we would be disturbed.
Yeah, we would no longer be a public library, and Sunderland residents wouldn't be
So it's
able
like
to
this-
use other libraries either.
No, it's sort of like two mechanisms that the state uses to make sure that libraries are continually funded, through, municipal appropriation.
I have a question, that I should know the answer to, but I don't. If we had our staff go up by $7,000-8,000 for the other 7 hours that were open, that changes our MIR the next year?
Yeah, it's the following year.
So, but it wouldn't affect it this one, so it's, so there's a delay.
Yes, yeah, they give us a little grace to figure it out.
And the nights that you're open until 8 o'clock, is it that busy between 7 and 8?
It is not, part of our certification requirements too, in addition to the materials expenditure, is we do need to be open a certain number of evening hours, and that is a state requirement, but it is just past 5. The reason why I'm hesitant to decrease hours in the evening, is it's really a main time for programming, and meetings. pretty much every evening, we have something going on in the community room, whether it's a library program or not. So it may be quiet in terms of patrons coming in to check out items and, you know, do other library business, but it is a busier time in terms of, providing a meeting space and a physical
I
building.
think it's also important note to me, not necessarily that people in this room don't know that, but just that as a town, we don't have a community center, we don't have a lot of public spaces for people to go and do things. This is really our only one, and having only people but certain days of the week, certain hours, limits the ability for people in town to meet and do things. And so supporting that is not just supporting the library in its normal book functions, but also in terms of providing that space for people in town to be able to meet for clubs and meet for events and have, you know, the wonderful bird man come and bring his owls and bird of prey and whatnot, you know, Tom McCartney and that kind of thing. So it's more than just the library functions, it's also it's really a combination building between a community center and a library, and we try to put both in one building in one budget, we appreciate that. I mean, from where I'm sitting, I love the idea of Thursday hours. I think it's very valuable, and not just because my kids get off the late bus on Thursdays and have nowhere to go. But that is really the case. There's nowhere for else to go. They go and they hang out at the corner store and wait for you to come pick them up after work, because there's literally nowhere else in town for them to go and, you know, hang their hat. But also, you know, sensory friendly hours is a vitally needed thing, and it's something that, as far as I'm aware, is not widely available elsewhere in this area. And so again, not just for Sunderland residents, but for the people across the Franklin County area, it's a great idea. I would love to see it happen. So,
Yeah, I mean, it's worth noting just, North Star Center for Self-Directed Learning, they estimate 80% of their teens who attend are on the autism spectrum. I mean, it's a huge amount, and they're not just from Sunderland, they come from all over, you know, so I think having two organizations in town that really support neurodivergent people, I think is a really, really nice thing. And especially having one of them be a free public resource, I think would be very meaningful for a lot of families.
Hi, I was wondering, is it busier in the summer?
I was gonna say, 8 o'clock is different depending on what time of year it is.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah, much busier in the
Feels
summer.
like midnight.
Yeah, like right now, if you go to the library, there might be a couple of folks there, although there was a parent group meeting with, you know, so it might be a little bit busier tonight, but you know, it's, yeah, the summer is a lot busier in the evenings, and it does shift. We could do seasonal hours, but again, people have such a hard time remembering our standard hours that have been this way at least 20 years, probably a lot longer. So I really want to keep things consistent the way they are, at least for the time being, hopefully just to add some special hours for folks.
well, and again, you know, it may be slower in the winter, but the winter is also the time when there's more of a need for there to be a public open place for warmth and that kind of thing,
Yes.
because, you know, we may not talk about it a lot in Sunderland, but there's still people in town who need to have places to go to keep warm. Having consistent hours for them is important.
We definitely see them.
Yes. We're glad. All right, I don't have any more questions. Anything else from the board? Finance committee? Anything else?
I just have one side, I mean, the school, elementary school, you know, walks and hikes to the school, to the library frequently. Would they be allowed to go there on a Thursday with sensory bias?
They would, I would just need to talk with the teachers and make sure it's a group that understands those special needs. I don't see it being a problem, no. We currently have the 5th grade, who've been coming over once a month, for the past few years now, which is really nice. And it is really chaotic. When they first come in, everyone comes in and they're browsing for books and they pick out, you know, what they want to read, but then they do that for 15 minutes, and then they do something called drop everything and read, where they go to the community room and they read for 45 minutes and it's silent. I mean, it's really amazing that they're.
Well, and the vice versa part of that is also that if there are neurodivergent kids in those elementary
Yeah.
classes, going to a already busy, loud library for those events is an additional sensory input issue for them. And so this would give them a day where if you had a class where you knew there was one kid that is not going to be able to participate otherwise, the teacher might potentially be going for Thursday because it's the day where they can have the best chances of having that
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great stuff all around. Anything else, any other questions? Don't see anyone online, wonderful. Well, thank you very much for coming in, we are very happy to have you in. We will do our darndest to take your budget questions into consideration and we'll see what we can do.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Thank you, board.
Thank you, everybody. I appreciate all you do for us.
Thank you, thank you.
Alrighty. So that, we, just confirm, we do not have EMS tonight, is that correct?
That is very good.
Alrighty. So that is the end of our, budget reviews, and our new business. Anything from the finance committee before we go into our sort of normal select board stuff?
I just wanna make sure that the next time that the select board meeting is that finance meeting's meeting with you all is on the 27th.
2 weeks from now, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, next week will be just us doing our business to try to keep, you guys have to sit through that stuff.
And we'll be doing,
Yep.
on the 27th, we'll be doing,
It'll be, who are the departments?
You can
It
follow.
was like fire and
Fire's gonna be actually the following week.
follow, okay.
I mean, 2 weeks after that.
you can tell us, it's okay, I just want.
It might be all the financial people. They were in a block, but I'm not, I think that's the 27th, but I'm not certain.
Oh,
Yeah.
Okay.
perfect. Thank you.
Do you guys need to adjourn?
I suppose we should adjourn. All right, someone
I
make
make
a
a
motion
motion
to,
to adjourn the finance committee.
Second.
all in favor? Opposed?
Right, thank you all, we will see you in 2 weeks. Alrighty. Next up is our, old business, so we have select board updates. Nothing for me, Crystal?
South County EMS meeting was Thursday night, when we left Thursday, we still didn't have completed budget from them, so. Our next meeting is February 6th, and hopefully February 6th, we'll be able to have a completed budget and be able to get them after, on the schedule after that. Other than that,
Alright. Dan?
Senior Center, we had a meeting Thursday, like a postpone because of some kind of budget, small change, but that's covered this week, so. Okay, nothing so much.
We'll know more about that next week. Alright, that's it for select board updates, town administrator updates.
I will be continuing to work on the revenue side of the budget and we'll have that, the complete draft of the budget, by the 27th.
Beautiful. Thank you for all the work on that and for, I know how much work it's been to get up and running and right in the middle of the budget season, there was no, not a lot of one way there, so we really appreciate how hard that's been. Alright, anything else for you?
Not tonight.
Beautiful. We don't have any correspondence today. I don't see anyone online or in person anymore for public comment, no executive session. So finance committee is already adjourned, so in that case, at this time, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I motion we adjourn.
Second.
Alright, a motion made and seconded to adjourn, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, 3-0 at 7:37.